Hello, my name is Pastor Russ Foust, and I'm pastor at Grace United Methodist Church in Kennard, Nebraska. And this is the message for July 12th of 2020, and it's based on Matthew 13, 1 through 19, and 18 through 23. And it's entitled, Jesus' Soil Classification Parable. And hopefully you'll follow along with me why that title will eventually make sense. And it's based on our gospel lesson where Jesus uses a parable for describing 4 soil types onto which a seed might fall. And the parable employs 4 types. Hardened soil, such as a path or a road, might provide. The thin, rocky soil, which has a thin layer above, but below there are impenetrable rocks, and the soil has no thickness and is prone to allowing things to quickly die. Soil that is already weedy and full of thorns. The type of soil in which the mass of noxious weeds is so thick that it is very difficult for a new idea, a new plant, to grow and sprout to maturity. And then, of course, there is the good and fertile soil. The soil that is ready to receive and support the growth of a new seed, a new idea, from germination through harvest. This parable works for us today here, because most, if not all of us, know what it takes to grow things in the soil. But I've heard that many of our youth today have no idea where their food comes from and what it takes to get it into the grocery store. Maybe just in a couple more generations, this parable of the 4 soil types might be completely lost on youth that have no concept of soil's role in the production of food. And Debbie, my wife, and I were discussing a way that we might modernize this parable. And here is our attempt. We call it the parable of the 4 social media. The hardened soil becomes a streamlining media source or blog that does not pay attention to the thoughts or ideas of others. It simply spews forth what the authors consider to be the truth, with no interaction or verification with others. Any new incoming ideas will be ignored, they will not even be acknowledged, and the new idea is immediately lost. The second type is the thin, rocky soil. Of the thin, rocky soil is the Twitter feed. It's short and basically one way, but with the ability for others to comment. In this type, the seed of a new idea is very, very short-lived, and the idea will probably be gone and forgotten upon the arrival of the next wave of sensational Twitters. And the third type is the weedy and thorny soil, which becomes Facebook, where a new and good idea can sprout and grow, but it will soon be overrun and crowded out as other information is posted by mostly self-centered and self-concerned authors. New ideas might sprout, but they won't be able to find purchase in society because of the sheer volume of useless information crowding them out. And finally, the fourth type, the type that emulates the good and fertile soil type, is good old human contact, and not truly a social interaction at all. The ability to talk to others one-on-one or in groups about God in an open and an understanding manner. And I would prefer this to be face-to-face, but in keeping with the social concerns of the day, this could be Zooming or with emails. Well, I don't know if this little exercise will make it any easier for you to find God, but I thought it was interesting. So I begin my true message by asking you, what soil type are you? If asked of me, I would like to say that it's the good and fertile soil. But I would probably answer, out of reaction, with the phrase Clariot Nicolette Webster. For you see, that was my go-to answer many years ago when I took a graduate-level soils class at Iowa State. I have never had a class quite like it. The course was taught by one of the most respected soil experts in the country, but to be with him on a field trip, you would never know it. While traveling around Iowa in a school bus, he would refer to us students as knockers because we were knocking on the door of knowledge. And if you came up to him individually with a question, he would address you as Tiger. And if something surprised him, such as one of us answering a question correctly, he would respond by claiming, "Holy bald-headed cats." And I still use that phrase today. His exams were multiple choice, but in a different way. Each question could be answered by circling 1, 2, 3, or 4 of the possible answers. There were no choices that said both A and C. You simply circled the correct answer or answers for each question. And scoring was done by giving you 2 points for every correct answer, and 1 point was subtracted for every incorrect answer. So on his exams, when they were for 100 points, you know that you had to have 50 circles on your page. Also, an incorrect response was considered to be either a response that was circled but not true, or a correct answer that you failed to mark, and that was worth -1 point. So you could actually end up with a negative score. And just to give you the full story, his midterm and final exams were oral, one-on-one with him. I loved the class, but my final grade did not indicate my enthusiasm. Well, to get back to my original lead into this story, when I did not know how to answer, I would answer with that phrase, Clariot, Nicollet, Webster, because in that class that was the major soil association type for the area that we were assigned in Iowa. It was my go-to answer, and I had the best chance of being right. So I guess I felt that it was better to guess than to just sit there and say nothing. Here, if I were in this area, I would probably say the Marshall-Ponca Soil Association, because that's what we have in this area. Despite the difficulties I had with his tests, I would have to say that he was indeed one of the best professors I have ever had in my rather checkered educational experience. And now, again, to get back to the gospel message, I ask, what soil type are you? The hard pan soil that lets nothing through, cracked and dry in normal weather and full of standing water when it rains? Or are you the rocky soil type with a thin layer of soil but no depth? Perhaps your life is more comparable to the thorny and weedy soil type, already full of so many other activities and plants, some desirable and some maybe not so much so. So many other plants that it is difficult for anything else to take root. Or are you the fine, deep black type, fertile and ready to grow good things? The perfect soil, in other words. Of course, we'd all like to be able to answer that we would be that fourth type. But, like soils, as in life, there is no perfect soil. Every farm has some problem areas, and every person has some flaws. And that's why Jesus' words, despite our best intentions, sometimes just don't take root. Sometimes there's just not enough time, or we don't make enough of an effort to till and foster the seedlings of Jesus' wise words. As with most of Jesus' parables, they require some deeper investigation to extract the parable's full meaning, even when he's provided us with the disciples' detailed response like he did in this one. For you see, Jesus had to teach the masses in parables for many reasons. First, if you recall, he was almost always talking to Jews who had been ingrained with the idea that other people, especially church leaders, would have to tell them how they should think about religion, and that the people could not have a close and personal relationship with God without a priest to act as a go-between. I believe that if Jesus had told his whole story back then, as we were able to read and hear it today, it would have been too much of a new way of thinking for the new believers at the time. His new ministry would have been cut short. It would have been cut short too soon because the people weren't yet ready to think in such a new way. And to complicate matters, there was increasing tension between Jesus and the Pharisees and the Sadducees. In fact, they had already decided that killing him was the best way to end his pesky influence on their established religion. For the Pharisees placed their law above everything, even human need. And they were so concerned about Jesus breaking their rules that they did not even care about the fact that he had helped many, many people who were suffering. They were like the weedy and thorny soil. And they were watching him very closely, for they considered that he had already blasphemed by, number one, he had said that he had the authority on earth to forgive sins. Number two, he was associated with sinners. Number three, Jesus had failed to keep the Sabbath according to Pharisee law. And number four, they had attributed his acts of miracles to be through the powers of Satan. So he had to camouflage the true meanings of his messages. For you see, the Pharisees were looking for any way they could indict him. Kind of like the Wicked Witch from the west of the Wizard of Oz, they knew that these things must be done delicately. They knew it must be handled to appease both those who have to live by their laws, in other words, the Jewish leaders, as well as those who govern under the Roman law. Today, I appreciate the freedom to openly and fully discuss the written record of God's news. We have the luxury of knowing how the story ends, well, at least so far. And we also have had 2,000 years of history of people interpreting his words. We have books that dig into the deep into the biblical history, and we have personal testimonies throughout the ages from true Christians, as well as the ability to discuss with each other the meanings of the passages. But even with all that help, we still have to work to get the meaning out. Take, for example, the sower of the seed. If like in the story, if the sower only came once, we might not be able to receive that seed at that exact moment. And we would have to be destined to live a life apart from God. But in life, and thankfully, we have many opportunities to receive God's word into our lives. Sometimes we're more receptive, sometimes less. And in life, as in farming, conditions vary from time to time. Also, not having the richest and blackest soil does not necessarily mean an end to farming. It just means that you have to evaluate your options and employ strategies to improve upon those soil conditions. What I'm getting at is nothing is ever permanent in your life, regardless of whether you work the soil or labor in some other endeavor. You can always try to improve your life in some manner, or at least adapt to make the best of the situation in which you find yourself. We in the world in which we live is constantly changing. To provide a second way of looking at this, I like to visualize my life as being a giant scene-by-scene tapestry that is woven as I live it. You can look at the top and see how life was for me as a child in my early youth. And then as you pan down, the events from my teenage years would be revealed, and then early adulthood, middle age, and now the current years. Stopping on the loom at the point where I presently am in my life. And as I speak to you, the warp and the woof are being selected to weave the next scenes based on my decisions today. We always have a chance to improve our lives, to improve the pictures of the tapestries of our lives by cultivating some of Jesus' seeds of wisdom. And whether it's my life or yours, I believe that the tapestry is not pre-woven. What becomes woven next will be appended to what has already happened in the past, but it is not totally dependent on that past. You may not be able to change what the next scene is, but you can certainly determine how it will be woven in. You can change your outlook, your desire to better understand God with just a little exertion. And as I have found, the energy required to change is more of a matter of duration and stamina than one of physical effort. Changing to become more receptive and eager to learn about God is initially a simple matter of changing your attitude. And we can always change, well, at least our attitude. And that alone is a true gift of freedom from God. Another thing that Jesus' parable doesn't inform us of is that we don't have to change the entire farm's soil at once. We can begin with one little corner and work on that. And as the weeds and the thorns are cleared off that little section and we work in more organic material, we can focus then on fostering and nurturing God's new growth in that area. And we see new religious growth sprouting in its place, and then we expand our efforts, for God's seed of truth is continually available. That is how I started changing my life, changing a soil type just a little bit at a time. And as I learn more about growing God's good plants, I now find it easier to clean out the weeds and replace it with the better vegetation. I even begin to anticipate finding new things out as I work to improve my life. There are still seasons of drought and seasons where there is too much water. In other words, when outside activities control what I have and I cannot control it myself. Also, there are times when my efforts to till the soil do not reflect my best efforts, those times when I just don't work hard enough. But in any case, my life, my soil type, is the result of an ongoing process to improve my situation in a world that is constantly changing. We need to be able to adapt to the new conditions as well as new ideas. And there is an excitement that comes from working to foster a new concept and then watching it flourish. Sometimes we might experience a crop failure, but with God, He's always there, and the potential is ever present to prepare new soil to receive and foster the seed of God's knowledge. No one instantly plants and tends their soils. It is done row by row and day by day. So it is with your relationship with God. It does take a little work, but in the long run you can look back and see the benefits of a little bit of work and a little bit of optimistic determinism.